When the door finally shuts, it's not the metal that gets you. It's the quiet that shows up after it, like a second inmate stepping into the cell with you. My name is Walter, and I'm 84 years old. The worst part of prison isn't the bars, or the yard, or the hard faces at chow. It's the minutes after lock-in, when the noise fades and you can hear your own life thinking. All day in here you can almost pretend you're just a body moving through a routine. Count, chow, work call, yard if they give it, another count, another line, another set of keys clinking somewhere behind you like a reminder you don't have to look at directly. In the crowd, you can keep your mind busy on small things. Who's got coffee? Who's got a decent bar of soap? Who's writing home? Who's trying to act tough? Because acting tough is easier than admitting they're scared. But lock-in strips that away. It starts with the sound first. The officer walking the tier, the radio low on his shoulder, the bored rhythm of boots on concrete. A quick glance through the window, a hand on the handle. The door closes with a finality that doesn't need to be dramatic. It's not a slam, it's worse than a slam, it's a decision. Then the building settles. You hear a cough down the range, somebody's TV murmuring through the wall, a flush, a distant laugh that doesn't reach anyone. And then, if you're old like me, you hear your joints complain when you sit down, and you hear your breath because you can't outrun it anymore. I keep a little calendar taped to the wall by my bunk. It's nothing special, just a thin paper one that came inside a letter years ago, and I keep replacing it month after month because it gives my hands something to do. Every night, when the lights go down and the day finally releases me, I cross off the square with the stub of a pencil. The pencil is dull, the lines are never straight. Some nights my hand shakes a little and the mark looks like a crooked scar. At first, I used to cross the days off like I was cutting through a rope, like I was getting somewhere. I used to believe there was a finish line if I just kept moving toward it. I used to count time the way young men do, as if time is something you control by naming it. Now I cross the days off like I'm signing a receipt. Because the truth is, the minutes after lock-in are when your memory does the real punishment. The law handled the sentence. The place handles the cage. Your memory handles the rest, and it doesn't take weekends off. Before prison, I was a man who lived in noise on purpose. I kept the radio on in the truck. I kept the TV on in the living room even if nobody was watching. I kept friends around who talked too loud and laughed too hard, because silence felt like someone staring at me, waiting for me to admit something I didn't want to admit. I wasn't always a bad man, not in the way people like to picture it. I worked. I paid bills. I shook hands. I went to birthdays and brought the cake and smiled for the photos. I had a way of sounding reasonable, and that's a dangerous thing in a man who wants what he wants. That's what I was best at, sounding reasonable. I learned early how to soften a wrong choice by wrapping it in a good story. Not a big story, just enough. Just this once. Just to get through. Just until things settle down. Just until the money comes in. Just until I'm back on my feet. Just until I can fix what I broke. I said just, the way some men say prayers. The turning choice that brought me here didn't feel like a turning choice when I made it. It felt like a continuation. Like the next step in a line I'd already been walking. I had a friend back then, someone I'd known since I was young, the kind of man who could make anything sound temporary. He had a grin that always suggested the world was overreacting. He called me when I was tired and angry and proud, and those three together can make you think you're thinking clearly when you're not. I had a job, but it wasn't enough. I had responsibilities, but I resented them. I had a family, but I acted like they were a weight instead of a gift. I'm not going to dress it up. I hurt people. I made choices that were selfish and cruel, and I told myself I was doing what I had to do. When the consequences started to show their face, I told myself I'd handle it later. Later is a word that sounds harmless until you realize it can swallow a whole life. The day everything tipped I remember small details more than I remember the big ones. I remember the smell of cheap coffee. I remember the air being too hot for the season. I remember looking at my hands and thinking they looked older than I felt. I remember the way my wife's voice sounded when she asked me a simple question, and I answered like she was accusing me of something, because guilt makes you defensive even when nobody's attacking. I can still hear myself saying, "Stop worrying," as if worrying is the problem, and not the thing you're doing that creates the worry. I lost my temper in a way I thought would pass. I made a decision I thought would be contained. I believed the damage would stay inside the room where it started. It didn't. That's what younger men don't understand. You don't get to choose how far your worst moment travels. You don't get to decide where it lands. You only get to choose whether you step into it or you step back. I stepped in, and then there was a blur of consequences that felt unreal at the time. Sirens and paperwork and faces I couldn't read. The first time I sat in a holding cell, I told myself it was temporary. The first time I stood in front of a judge, I told myself I'd be home soon. The first time I heard a number attached to my life, a number so large it didn't fit in my mouth, I still tried to bargain with the air. I thought prison would be the punishment. I thought prison would be the hard bed and the bad food and the cold looks. I thought prison would be the shouting and the fights and the fear. Some of that is here, sure. You learn quickly how to move without inviting trouble. You learn where to look and where not to look. You learn that a line can become an argument, and an argument can become a problem, and a problem can become your whole week. But that's not what stays with you after lock-in. What stays is what you did. In the daytime, you can distract yourself with procedure. The officers call count, and everyone freezes into place, standing by bunks or sitting on stools like mannequins pretending to be men. You hold still while someone checks you off like inventory. Then the building exhales and moves again. At chow, you carry a tray that never feels clean, no matter how many times it's washed, and you sit where you can see enough to stay aware, and you eat, because eating is a way to mark time. Some guys joke. Some guys stare. Some guys hurry like the food might get taken back if they don't prove they deserve it. In the yard, the sun can almost trick you. You look up and see blue, and for a second your body believes you're outside, like other people are outside, like you could keep walking if you wanted. Then you see the fence, and the wire, and the corners, and your mind corrects itself. Work call is its own kind of pretending. You sweep floors that will be dirty again before the day ends. You fold laundry for people who are just as trapped as you. You wipe tables. You count screws. You do whatever they let you do, because having a task is a way to feel less useless. But lock-in is the moment the institution hands you back to yourself. It happens in stages. First the tear quiets, then the conversations thin out, then the televisions turn down, then the officer's footsteps move away. Then you're left with the soft noises of bodies trying to get comfortable in places that were never meant to be comfortable. And then your mind starts pulling items off the shelf, like it's cleaning out a closet. I used to think the mind brought up memories because it wanted to teach you something. Now I think it's simpler than that. I think the mind brings up memories because it can. Because there's room for them when the day stops. Because, in silence, everything you've been avoiding finally has a place to sit. That's when I see my kitchen table from decades ago, the stain in the wood from a spilled drink, the chair leg that wobbled, my daughter's backpack on the floor because she was always in a hurry, my wife's hands moving while she talked, trying to keep me with her, trying to keep my attention from drifting away. And I remember how often I was physically there and mentally gone. I remember the look my son gave me once, a look I didn't understand until I was locked behind a door. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was something colder than both. It was the look of a boy learning he couldn't rely on his father. That look comes back after lock-in, like it has a key. The recurring object in my cell is that crossed-off calendar. And if you want to know what prison does to a man over time, it does this. The calendar stops being a plan and becomes evidence. Some nights, I stare at the squares I've already marked through, and I don't feel proud that I survived them. I feel hollow, because surviving is not the same as living, and a lot of these squares were survived by a version of me who still thought he was the main character in a story that would somehow end in forgiveness without effort. I used to write letters like they were bills, like if I mailed enough words, I could pay down what I owed. I wrote apologies that were really explanations. I wrote explanations that were really excuses. I wrote promises I couldn't keep because I still didn't understand what I'd actually done. Then, one year, they told me I was up for parole review. That phrase, parole review, can do strange things to a man in here. It can inflate you. It can soften you. It can make you start acting like a free man before you've earned a free life. I watched it happen to men all the time. They'd start working out more, talking about jobs they'd get, talking about food they'd eat, talking about the way they'd sleep without someone yelling count in the middle of the night. They'd start looking at the fence like it was already behind them. I told myself I wouldn't do that. I did it anyway, quietly. I started seeing the calendar as a path again. I started counting not just days, but months. I started imagining my daughter's face when she'd see me in a normal room, without glass between us, without an officer listening. I started imagining standing on a porch, feeling wind that wasn't filtered through razor wire. I even let myself picture a small thing that still embarrasses me to admit. I imagined going to a grocery store and buying my own bread, just standing there reading labels like a regular old man. I imagined the simple dignity of choosing. Then the day of the review came, and it was nothing like the movies. No dramatic hallway, no moment where everyone in the building seemed to stop for my fate. I sat in a plain room with plain people who had seen every kind of story a man could tell. I wore my best state-issued clothes, pressed by someone else's hands, because even dignity in here is borrowed. I answered questions. I tried to keep my voice calm. I tried not to sound like a man begging, even though that's what hope can turn into when it's trapped in a chair. I told the truth as best as I could, and I left out the parts that still scared me because I didn't want to look weak. And then, weeks later, after lock-in, a guard slid a thin envelope through the slot. It landed on the floor with a soft slap, like it didn't weigh anything. But I stared at it like it was a brick. My name on the front, my number, official return address, paper that smelled like office air. My cellie looked at me and didn't say anything. Even in prison, there are moments that feel private, and the decent thing is to give them space. I picked up the envelope and sat on my bunk with it in my hands. And I didn't open it right away. I just held it and listened to the building settle, because by then the day had ended, and the silence was walking toward me. I told myself, it could be good news. I told myself, even if it's not, you can handle it. I told myself, you've been through worse. Then I opened it, and my eyes went straight to the line that mattered. Parole is denied. That's the line. That's the whole sentence inside the sentence. Under it, in smaller print, it explained when I could try again. Not soon. A long stretch of time that felt like the system reminding me that my life was not urgent to them. I sat there with that paper in my hands, and the strangest part was how quiet I stayed. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't pound the wall. I just felt something inside me stop negotiating. That was my vivid before and after. Before that envelope, a part of me still believed I could make the pass smaller by being patient. After that envelope, I understood something I should have understood all along. Time doesn't apologize to you for passing. It just passes. Lock-in that night felt different. The doors shut, and I realized I might die in this place, not because of a sudden event, not because of some dramatic tragedy, but because years can simply stack up until you run out of them. And when that realization hits you, the minutes afterward become a courtroom. Your mind runs without a judge. I stared at the crossed-off calendar and saw the next years laid out like blank squares I might never get to fill with anything but more marks. I looked at my hands and saw an old man's hands. And it occurred to me that my family has been aging without me, and I have been aging without them, and there is no appeal for that. That denial letter became my nightly companion for a while. Not physically. I tucked it away, folded, in a book like a pressed leaf, but it lived in the cell with me the way a smell lives in fabric. In the days after, I watched myself do what I always did when I was cornered. I looked for someone to blame. The board, the system, the politics of it. Anything to avoid the plain truth that I had built the life I was living. That's the thing about consequences. In a crowd, you can argue with them. In silence, you finally have to sit with them. There's a kind of mental noise that starts up after lock-in. It's not like hearing voices. It's just your own thoughts, running old footage, rewinding and replaying, searching for the moment where you could have turned left instead of right. You remember the first lie you told that felt easy. You remember the friend you laughed with, the one who brought trouble like it was entertainment. You remember the look on your wife's face the first time she realized she couldn't trust what you said. You remember the way you defended yourself with anger, because anger can feel like strength when you're ashamed. And you remember the people you hurt in ways you can never fully measure. Sometimes, after lock-in, I'd stare at the cinder block wall until it blurred, and the memory would get so sharp it felt like it was happening again. That's when prison becomes something else. The cell stays the same size, but your mind becomes a bigger room, and you're trapped in that too. I asked to speak to the chaplain after the denial. Not because I suddenly became holy, not because I expected a miracle. I asked because I needed somewhere to put the truth that was rotting inside me, and I didn't trust myself to hold it alone. The chaplain was an older man with tired eyes. He'd heard every kind of confession a person can make without the relief of being absolved by the world. He listened more than he spoke, which is rare in a place where everyone is trying to survive by being loud. When I finished talking, he didn't pat my hand or tell me everything would be fine. He just said, "You can't rewrite it, Walt. You can only stop lying about what it cost." That one line did more to me than the denial letter did, because it named what I'd been doing my whole life. I had been lying about the cost, not only to other people, but to myself. After that, my change wasn't big. It wasn't cinematic. It didn't turn me into a different man overnight. Prison is full of men who announce transformations like speeches. Most of them fade by next week. What I did was smaller, and it was harder in a way that didn't get attention. I stopped writing letters that tried to explain me. I started writing letters that admitted me. The first one I sent to my daughter was short enough to fit in a breath. I didn't ask her to forgive me. I didn't ask her to visit more. I didn't bring up how hard it was in here. I just told her I understood why she kept her distance, and that I was sorry for the kind of father I had been, the kind who demanded loyalty without earning trust. I expected nothing back. Weeks later, a letter came. Her handwriting looked older. That's how long I'd been gone. She didn't write much. She didn't soften it for my comfort. She told me she had learned how to live without me, and she wasn't going to tear open her life just to prove she still cared. But she also said she read my letter 3 times because it sounded like the first honest thing I'd ever sent her. That's what prison teaches you if you let it, not through rules, but through silence. Honesty is not something you say when it's convenient. It's something you practice when it doesn't earn you anything. I started crossing off my calendar differently after that. Not like a man escaping. Not like a man celebrating survival. More like a man taking attendance. Here. I'm still here. I did this. I'm living inside what I made. And because I can't undo it, I can at least stop pretending it's someone else's story. There are nights when lock-in still hurts, when the building goes quiet and my mind tries to punish me by replaying the worst scenes with better lighting, making them more vivid than they ever were at the time. I can't control that, but I can control what I do with it. Sometimes I sit on the bunk and let the memory come, and instead of arguing with it, I name it. Yes, that happened. Yes, I chose that. Yes, that cost people I love more than I admitted. Then I do something small to keep myself from slipping into the old habit of excuses. I pull out a blank sheet of paper and write a few lines that are only for me, lines I never would have written as a younger man. I was wrong. I was afraid. I hid behind noise. It's strange how those 3 sentences can feel like a kind of freedom, even in a locked cell, because they are the opposite of what put me here. What put me here was the belief that I was entitled to my own version of reality. There's another thing about prison people don't tell you. You learn the difference between punishment and responsibility. Punishment is what the place does to your body. It tells you when to stand, when to sit, when to eat, when to sleep. It takes your choices and turns them into permissions. Responsibility is what you do with your mind when nobody is watching. Responsibility is admitting that the loneliness you feel after lock-in is not just something happening to you, it's something you participated in building. Some nights I hear younger guys down the tier laughing, talking big, making plans they don't understand yet. I don't hate them for it. I recognize it. Noise as armor. Noise as denial. Noise as a way to pretend the future is negotiable. Then the officers make their rounds again, and one by one the doors close, and the laughter thins, and the building returns to its night face. That's when I look at my crossed-off calendar, and I think about the world outside these walls. Families in living rooms, couples arguing about groceries, kids forgetting to call their parents back. People annoyed by small inconveniences, not realizing how precious it is to be annoyed by something small in a place you can leave. And I think about the lies I told myself, the slow ones, the ones that didn't feel like lies because they sounded reasonable. That's what I want you to understand. If you're listening from the other side of a locked door, you can still open. You can outrun consequences in a crowd for a while. You can drown them out with friends, with work, with entertainment, with pride, with the story you tell yourself about why you're different. But you can't outrun them in silence. One day, the day will end, the noise will thin, and you will be alone with what you chose, and whatever you've been feeding your conscience will be the thing that sits down beside you. If you are free right now, I'm not asking you to live in fear. I'm asking you to pay attention to the moments you call small, the choices you label harmless because you don't want to look at their shadow. Tell the truth sooner than I did, not as a performance, not as a confession you make once and then forget. Tell it in the way you live. Tell it in the way you treat people when you're tired, when you're angry, when you feel justified. Because the worst part of prison is not being locked in a cell. The worst part is being locked in with yourself, night after night, while your memory stands there holding the receipt, and the only sound left is the pencil in your hand crossing off another day.